are never going to understand how critical this particular time in history is. We have $7.7 trillion worth of economic events that are going to hit America in the gut.
This is An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun, President and CEO of Private Wealth Consultants, your free market voice.
Free market voice
of the Midwest. Call Gary, 855-334-4556. Gary Rathbun has over 30 years of experience in making the best choices for you to keep more of what you earn. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of self-reliance. An Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
This is our country.
Greetings and welcome again to Economy of One. I am your host, Gary Rathbun, joined by my longtime business partner, Doug Miller. We're going to get right into this. We got him on hold. One of our favorites, Commander Kirk Lippold, United States Navy, retired. He was the commanding officer of the USS Cole when it came under suicide terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda in the port in Yemen. During his command, him and his crew were distinguished themselves by saving the American warship from sinking. He's the author of Front Burner, Al-Qaeda's attack on the USS Cole, and he currently serves as the president of Lippold Strategies, LLC, a consulting firm specializing in executive leadership development and long-range strategic planning. Commander, once again, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back on the show, Gary. Thank you for having me this evening.
I appreciate you taking the time with us. I got a lot of things to talk about because you have a unique perspective. I mean, we read a lot of articles, read a lot of blogs and stuff, but you've actually been on the front lines. You've been in different areas. And I want to start with the taking of some of our sailors in the last, I think it was last 2 weeks by Iran. Well, what's, I'm going to throw you an open-ended question. What's your take on that? Because I've read so many different theories and different opinions on it.
Well, Gary, I think that's one of the biggest problems that we as Americans are having today, both looking at the military and the administration, in the fact that you have to ask a question on what should have been a routine transit from Kuwait to Bahrain, where Fifth Fleet headquarters in charge of all the Navy ships in the Middle East is located, why those two boats got as close as they did to Farsi Island, and why they allowed themselves to be captured in the manner they did. Because in talking with some folks that I know at the Pentagon, those two boats made by Sweden are extremely well armed. In addition to 50 cals, they also have a chain gun that could literally have shredded the Iranians if it came out there.
Wow.
And this whole excuse that, it was mechanical difficulties, then it was navigation difficulties, and then the poor lieutenant who apologized. And when you really look at it, these boats, before they ever deploy, are well qualified on their navigation systems. Each of them should have known where they were. Mm-hmm. They qualify in towing each other. So if one broke down, the other should have been able to tow it out.
Right.
They have satellite communications on board. They could have talked to Fifth Fleet. And if in the wild event that it was some kind of special ops mission to try and get close and draw a reaction from the Iranians, well, why wasn't there top cover? Why didn't they have combat air patrol and an F-18 overhead or an armed helo guarding them? So there's a lot of questions that right now are being met with absolute silence from the Navy administration. And I think that we as Americans deserve some answers.
You know, the first thing that raised a red flag for me was when they came out and said it was a navigation error. And I thought, you know what? We got the best trained military people in the universe. It's hard for me to believe that they strayed off into something that it was a navigational error, that it was a equipment malfunction like that. And, the problem we're having is everybody's speculating. Nobody really knows the facts. And like you said, our leadership just isn't very forthcoming. And quite honestly, I didn't like the reaction of our leadership to pictures of our soldiers with their hands on their head and that kind of stuff. I mean, that really disturbed me in this day and age. Is that symptomatic?
It absolutely should disturb you.
Yeah.
The fact that the administration and the spokesman at the White House, Josh Earnest, just kind of dismissed it out of hand as, well, that's just how they did it. No, that comes from someone who doesn't know how demeaning that is to people who serve and swear to put their lives on the line to defend our nation. Mm-hmm. Being put on your knees, hands behind your head, at gunpoint, for what would later be classified as a routine navigational error. There is a lot more to this. But that out-of-hand dismissal by an administration spokesman that clearly he speaks on behalf of the President of the United States just typifies that the view toward the military is we just can't be bothered with you. That might prove embarrassing if we dig into that. So let's just dismiss it and please move along. Nothing to see here is wholly inappropriate.
I have so many questions on this, so I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, so forgive me. But initially we heard that they were Navy SEALs, and then we heard, well, they couldn't have been Navy SEALs because there was a woman on board. What's the significance of one of our military people there being a woman on that boat?
Well, two things. I'll touch on one real quick, and that is you have to remember, Gary, anytime you have a situation like this, first reports are notoriously inaccurate, not intentionally, but just because of the flow of information as they're trying to figure out what's going on and what's happening. Personally, as far as the women being involved in this thing, to me it was a non-issue, okay? There weren't men and women on those boats. There were sailors, just like on board USS Cole. I didn't have men and women aboard my ship that morning. I had sailors. And when the explosion occurred, they performed admirably. They are true heroes. Those young men and women, or those young men and that one woman that were captured in these very difficult circumstances, suddenly becoming the spotlight of a major international event between two nations that are adversaries. Look, for all I can tell, they did extremely well. But, I'm gonna kind of go off a little bit here, and it's a very unique thing that a lot of people aren't aware of. It used to be that when you did your code of conduct training, you went through each article in the code of conduct. You understood the impact of what it meant. The old name, rank, and serial number still holds true. Nowadays, when you do code of conduct training, it's basically when you enlist, when you re-enlist, maybe when you get promoted in rank, and it's done as an online course because the Navy and the military wants to save money. So you go through a bunch of PowerPoint slides, you get the quiz right at the end, you've checked a block without truly understanding the ramifications of what that code means. And that poor lieutenant who apologized really didn't understand the history behind our code of conduct. But having women involved in this event, to get back to your point, to me it's a non-issue.
Okay. Well, and once again, we're inundated with information, and I've always said that we have to be able to be smart enough to separate knowledge from information and then separate wisdom from knowledge. And so all of this stuff we got and all the reports, and I'm always suspicious when, someone like Secretary of State John Kerry is, beating the drum saying how great it is that we got our sailors back and it was a non-incident and Iran didn't really mean anything by it. I think Iran meant a lot by that, don't you?
Oh, they absolutely did. And they took great joy in twisting the great Satan's tail on the international stage just prior to the relaxing of sanctions and the acceptance by the international community and the IAEA that Iran had complied with their agreements under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to, under the administration's eyes, prevents them from building a bomb. In my eyes, delays them building that bomb.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the cynic inside me says it's probably not delaying them very much. They're going ahead and building things. And you're
absolutely right. And it's not the delay. It's the Iranians cannot. They have a track record of us being unable to trust them.
Right.
So what makes them think that suddenly they're going to comply just because the IAEA is overseeing and they can't shift elsewhere? Hey, when you got $100 billion in your pocket, rattling around now, yeah, you could do a lot of infrastructure improvements for your people, build new hospitals, new schools, new roads, new bridges. Oh, you can also, by the way, start building covert facilities to continue your research into how to build a bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was making a comment earlier today on one of my other radio shows that one of the beauties of the price of oil being down is it's really getting some of these countries, some of the terrorists, even ISIS came out and they're cutting salaries of their people. So price of oil being down has some positives in the sense that it's getting into the pocketbook of some of these people.
Absolutely, yes. And that is a good thing. I mean, in many ways, Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, is actually sitting in the catbird seat because they can bring oil out of the ground cheaper than almost any nation on earth. And by the fact that they are not cutting the quotas as the lead dog with OPEC, they are undercutting Iran's ability to make money off of their oil. Yeah. They're really putting a crimp on Putin and the Russians because they cannot export oil and make money, which means Putin can't, while he can bark a lot, eventually it's going to catch up with him economically. Yeah. But unfortunately, that same situation is what really hit us in the pocketbooks as Americans, because it essentially is breaking the back of our ability to have energy independence here at home, to have a oil industry that is robust with fracking and other methods. So while it may be wonderful in undermining those own things, it is hitting us in the pocketbook as well in a very critical industry here at home.
Yeah, no question. The whole energy sector is getting beat up on that. I read somewhere that Saudi Arabia can pull a barrel of oil out of the ground for $3. So
I've heard same about $5, and it just when you're dealing with that ability of a nation to produce energy that inexpensively, trust me, they want to keep inflicting the pain, especially in their backyard with Iran, who is exerting influence, propping up the Assad regime, who is exerting influence with Hezbollah, who is also backing the Houthi rebels who have invaded Yemen or have toppled the government in Yemen. I mean, Saudi Arabia has got a very vested fight in this, but controlling oil is not the only thing that they can do. They could do a lot more, and they're not, unfortunately.
Yeah, they got a big stick, and they're swinging part of it. We're speaking with Commander Kirk Lippold, United States Navy retired commanding officer of the USS Cole when it came under suicide attack. Commander, I got a few more questions. Like to do another segment in a couple other subjects. You got time to hold through the break with us?
I do. Go ahead, please, Gary.
I appreciate it. We'll come back in just a minute and continue our conversation with Commander Kirk Lippold. I'm Gary Rathbun with Doug Miller. This is an Economy of One.
This is an Economy of One with Gary Rathbun.
We're spending some time talking to Commander Kirk Lippold, United States Navy retired. He was the commanding officer of the USS Cole when it was attacked by suicide bombers from Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Commander, I want to switch gears just a little bit and get your opinion, because you have an intimate knowledge of the Middle East and Muslim terrorists. And what's your thoughts? Once again, we're getting a lot of information. I don't know how much of it is wisdom, but we're getting a lot of information about Syrian refugees, a lot of refugees from the Middle East coming into this country pretty much at will. What's your thoughts on that? I'm not in favor of building a 20-foot wall with cantina wire on top, but what's your thoughts on terrorists posing as refugees and coming in, and what, if anything, can we do about that?
Well, that's a great question, Gary, and I think that's one that Americans either outright or in the back of their minds are mulling over, and they're watching all the presidential candidates on both sides talk about it. Mm-hmm. Right now, while there is some indication that the ISIS fighters are posing as refugees and that obviously several have gotten into Europe and have wreaked havoc, there's no real indications that we have them here. Okay. That said, we have no real way to vet them. There's no way that the administration, despite their promises, can ensure that these people are who they are, where they're from, or the background, because, the Assad regime is not going to share that with us. Mm-hmm. If there's intelligence sources in the country from other nations, they probably can't share that with us. So I think it's very problematic. And I think that, while shutting down and saying we shouldn't allow any Muslims into the country, that's not a realistic solution to any of the problems out there, because there are some countries that we do want to welcome immigrants here. We can vet them properly, and we can welcome them with open arms like we did other people. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that if we don't know how we can vet these Syrian refugees, then the program has to come to a halt and be suspended temporarily until there are some measures or some controls put in place. To do that, otherwise, all you need, it's a zero game. And I don't think the president should be in a position where he's having to apologize to a family who lost a loved one because one person getting through and killing Americans is one too many.
Yeah.
It's a risk that we, at this point in time, given the instability in the world, why incur that risk when we already have so many others on the international stage and here at home?
It's frustrating as a citizen, because it's easy to see how Congress and this administration is making this so political, trying to invoke so much emotion on it, and some of the solutions out there, or some of the comments out there being put out, is just so silly. We're going to ask them if they're a radical terrorist or not. I mean, it reminds me of the old show. I don't know if you ever saw the old show Happy Days with both.
If I admit that, you're asking for both of us to date ourselves.
Well, I've pretty much dated myself already. But one of the characters is talking to the Fonz, the cool guy in the show, about getting married, and he makes the comment that he was going to marry a virgin, and everybody laughed. Well, how do you know she's a virgin before you marry her? And he comes back and he said, well, virgins don't lie. And you got to think about that to get the humor in it. And when you ask some of these guys coming in if they're radical or believe in certain things, well, if they're willing to blow themselves up and kill people, lying is just a minor aspect to that. So I don't know how we're going to vet them without the database and that kind of stuff. So
I don't think we can, and that's why I think that we need to stop the program and just say, hey, it's not that eventually we can't accept some of these refugees into the country, but as of right now, the program has to be put into suspense. Yeah. And while the Europeans have chosen to do that, you got to remember, it was the Europeans that also chose to yell and scream at us and tell us that we had to close Guantanamo Bay. Right. And when the president came in and suddenly shared with the Europeans who we were holding down there, you'll notice how they haven't taken very many of those detainees into their countries, because they suddenly realized they're bad. And I think given what happened in Paris, I think that the Europeans are even now taking stock of some of their humanitarian decisions and saying, okay, while it's wonderful to do, are those in the best interest of our nation as a whole?
Yeah, and we've got an advantage here, be it a morbid advantage, to see what happens when you open the borders and let all these people in without any restrictions. I'd hate to think what would happen in this country if 1,000 young men that appear to be North African, Middle Eastern started raping our women. I'm not sure the law would be able to stop what some of our people would do in reaction to that.
Well, and I would hope, Gary, that as horrific as something as that might be, I hope that the reaction would not be of Americans to take the law into their own hands.
I agree.
We have the capability and capacity in this nation, despite horrible things happening, to really take a step back and demand justice. And the biggest problem you have is that in many ways our justice system has begun to swing toward giving a lot, just like the late 60s, when they were more interested in giving the rights to the criminals. Well, now we don't want to, we're starting to see that happen again. The person who's the victim gets no justice. The person who's the criminal, that's who we're worried about. Right. And we can see it play out with this administration. It has been 15 years since USS Cole was attacked. The terrorist that we're holding in Guantanamo Bay on the Shiri has been there since 2003.
Wow.
My crew and those families have yet to see justice, and this administration has directly interfered with the legal process in a manner that has not allowed justice to be served because they're more interested in protecting the rights of terrorists than they are in seeing justice for Americans whose families have paid the ultimate price in the loss of a loved one.
Absolutely incredible. In speaking about justice for American families, I'm running way long, and I appreciate all your time. I'm going to ask you one last real quick question. Last time we talked quite a bit about what went on in Benghazi and the political aspects of that and how our people were treated and that kind of stuff. Just real quick, have you seen the movie 13 Hours, and what do you think of it if you have seen it?
I have not seen it, and I'm taking a deep breath because I know that I have to make sure that I am really, really calm before I walk in, because I know when I walk out, I'm probably not going to have the same blood pressure.
I agree. I have not seen it myself, and I'm going to.
Everybody I've talked to said that when you walk out, you are just so angry because while they never directly attribute anything to anybody or any organization, it is very clear who they're drawing the references and parallels to. Right. And it doesn't take a large leap of faith to figure out who they're talking about. And quite frankly, when you have the former Secretary of State running the president who can't even handle classified information, right. Do we really want to be trusting the nuclear trigger to someone that cannot safeguard our nation's most sensitive intelligence?
And I just had a terrible thought that when she was asked about wiping a hard drive, she made the inane comment about, you mean with a rag? Can you imagine asking her about carrying the football? She probably doesn't know, Gary, that's a briefcase.
Here's the real question is that if you were to ask her, did you honestly believe that you could execute the full scope of your duties as Secretary of the State and receive nothing classified in any email ever during your entire tenure while at that place? Yeah. And if her answer is, yes, I thought I could do that, then she lacks the intellectual capacity, the brains, to be our president, or she is so ethically compromised that it would represent a grave danger to our nation to make her the president of the United States. Either way, we cannot allow that person to become our president.
I'm with you there, Commander. I appreciate all your time. We've been speaking with Commander Kirk Lippold, United States Navy retired, former commanding officer of the USS Cole. Commander, I could talk to you all afternoon. I really appreciate your time with us. You're a great American, and it's been an honor spending a few minutes with you tonight.
Thank you, Gary. I always love being on your show and the opportunity to reach out and make sure your viewers are up to date on the latest stuff that's going on because, being back here a lot near the D.C. area, it does not engage in reality-based thinking. But you want to know something? With this snowstorm coming, they're going to get a wake-up call on how they better learn how to shovel.
Well, the beauty is maybe it'll shut down the government for a couple hours. So we'll look forward to it. Once again, Commander, I really appreciate your time. And next time we talk, we'll both have seen the movie, and we'll chat about that as well.
Sounds good, Gary. Thank you.
Have a good evening.